Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the posting of the colors. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please remain standing. We are next going to do a flag unfolding and refolding ceremony. This ceremony will be done with the playing of taps to commemorate, remember, and give respect to those, especially those that did not return from Vietnam. Please remain standing. During the playing of taps, it's required of uniformed military personnel that they salute, and is also allowed, authorized, and encouraged that any veteran that has been a member of the military salute also in recognition of our fallen. The U.S. National Flag Foundation, you may be seated. The U.S. National Flag Foundation has recommended that the following explanation be read during the folding of the American flag during the flag folding ceremony. I'm sure, as many of you have never heard this reading before. And I'll explain what each fold of the flag means. The first fold stands for liberty. We are free to own property, to elect our government representatives, to attend the church of our choice, to openly disagree, to travel freely without restriction, to pursue an education, and to pursue the American dream. The white stripe of the flag symbolizes our liberty. The second fold represents unity. Abraham Lincoln stated that a house divided against itself cannot stand. National unity in the face of national disasters and extreme external threats, such as those posed on and after September 11, have preserved our constitutional republic. The third fold stands for justice. In America, we believe that every person stands equal before the law and is deserving of just and fair treatment. The blue of the flag embodies justice. The fourth flag symbolizes perseverance. To preserve means to endure, to remain steadfast despite severe hardship or obstacles. The fifth fold represents hardiness. Hardiness is the ability to withstand difficulty while remaining resolute despite adversity. Our aggressors in World War II underestimated America's hardiness. The sixfold stands for valor. Valor means courage, the act of defending what is right even in the face of opposition. Nathan Hale, the Revolutionary War patriot, who was convicted of spying in 1776, before he was hanged, displayed great valor with his words, "I only regret that I have one life to give for my country." The seventh fold symbolizes purity. A pure nation is free from taint, from what weakens it, pollutes, or renders it ineffective. Our founding fathers illustrated freedom's path for us when they created the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. The eighth fold represents innocence. Innocence implies that one is unacquainted with evil and is thus free from sin. George Washington once stated, "The love of my country will be the ruling influence in my conduct." The ninth fold signifies sacrifice. To sacrifice is to give up something valued for an ideal, a belief, or a goal. America exists today because of the sacrifices of countless Americans. Many have made the ultimate sacrifice of their lives in battles waged during the Revolution, the World Wars, Korea, Vietnam, the Gulf, Afghanistan, and other locations around the world. We pay tribute to them. The tenth fold stands for honor. One who possesses honor possesses a keen sense of ethical conduct. To honor a person or ideal is to display respect for them. We give thanks for all who have acted with honor in the founding and the growth of America. The 11th fold symbolizes independence. Independence is the state of being free, of being able to make unrestricted choices within the law as free individuals and as a free nation. Ever since our nation's birth, America has had the opportunity to defend their independence against all oppressors. The 12th fold represents truth. Truth is the body of real evidence and facts. It is preserved through adherence to reality and the avoidance of falsehoods. America was built upon the God-given truths articulated in the Declaration of Independence. The 13th fold today is to memorialize and dedicate to those who served, suffered, and possibly did not return from Vietnam.
Well, I want to thank everybody for being here. This is just an awesome group. Thank you so much for spending a few hours with us at the Warhawk in the final of a 6-part series. It's been a huge honor to present this over the last 6 months. It has brought so much growth to those of us that volunteer and work at the museum. I hope it has to all of you that have attended. I do want to thank the people that made this possible. First, though, I'd like to know If you would raise your hand or stand, if you can, if you're a Vietnam veteran or a family member. Thank you so much for your service to our country. It is such an honor to have you here. You are such great Americans. I just want to say that here at the Warhawk, we have conducted over 900 Veterans History Project interviews that have been sent to the Library of Congress. A large portion of them are Vietnam, but it's from every war. And we believe so strongly that the fabric that covers America is made from our veterans. You are the fabric of this country that keeps us strong, safe, and the most enriched, wonderful country in the world to live in. So thank you for protecting us. Thank you for being a part of that fabric forever. I wanted to thank, of course, all of our volunteers. Please raise your hand. All the volunteers, they're all over this place. I swear to Pete, without them, we wouldn't be here. We had 22,000 volunteer hours last year alone from these wonderful people, and they've been here every symposium to do all of this for all of us. I want to also thank the committee members, and I'd like for them to raise their hands too when they, because we worked for a whole year on this before we started it, and boy, I'll tell you, we went through a lot of Jack Daniels, and no, I'm just kidding. We had a lot of fun, believe me, but it was very hard work and very heartfelt work how to create this program so that we could present to you an educational program about a war called Vietnam. And I believe we've succeeded. We're very proud of what we've done. Don Minger, if you'd raise your hand over here. Ted Thompson. Where is Ted Thompson? Wave your hands, please. John Sterling is here. Jerry Van Ingren, he just presented the flag. Jack Walburn, if Jack is here, raise your hand. Myself, John Lane, and I'm not sure where he is, but he's here. And Lance Stevenson over here. Heather Mullins, she's out working. There she is, okay. Jim Leonard. General Mark Schmidt, and Major General Gary Saylor. What a team, huh? What a combination. And I want to thank the Mountain Home Air Force folks that came down here every time bringing those cookies and those drinks of water and everything they did. They were so heartfelt to do that, and it meant so much to them. We want to honor the Chiefs Group, the top 3, First Sergeant Council, the Air Force Sergeants Association, and the 389th Fighter Squadron for your service to our country and for being here for this event and helping us so much. Next, I've talked to you about the sponsors every single session. Without them, without these folks that sponsored this, and we've taken the big banner outside for today, but without them, there seriously would not be an event because they came forward. It took me 1 week to go out into our community and ask for financial support to help us create and present a free program of this magnitude. And without batting an eye, these folks came forward. They were so proud to be a part of this. So could the representative from the John F. Nagel Foundation come up? Could the representative from Idaho Power come up? Doug and Meredith Carnahan, come up. Bill Gornick, come up. I'm already here, John and Sue Paul. Warhawk Air Museum representative, please, come up. Morris Sterrett Products Company representative, please, come up. Cloverdale Funeral Home and Carriage Services, please come up. And just stand right here, if you would, right in front here. Right up here, so everybody can see. You can't hide behind me. None of these guys want to, these people are going, so just right here so you can see these wonderful people. The Idaho Community Foundation, Lindsay Foundation, Family Foundation, please come up. AgriBeef, please, the representative from AgriBeef who is providing this great barbecue for us today. Price Pump Company, all the way from Sonoma, California. Please come up. Albertsons. Kathy's here. I don't know if there's a representative from Micron. Please come up. The Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation. Napa Municipal Airport. The Riverside Hotel. KTVB Channel 7. Haven't they done a fantastic job advertising? Wow. Wow. Incredible. The Idaho Division of Veterans Services. Someone could come up. I'm going to take just a second and let each one of these folks introduce themselves. I'll start right down here.
Good morning. My name is Charles Richardson. I'm with the Riverside Hotel, and we definitely are honored to be a part of this program and glad to support it.
I'm Kathy Holland from Albertsons, and we're proud to support the Warhawk Air Museum and all of these wonderful veterans that were able to come out today.
Terry with Cloverdale Funeral Home, and sometimes I feel I work for the Warhawk more than Cloverdale, as I'm here more often.
I'm Bill Gornick, and I've been associated with the Warhawk Museum from the very beginning. In what year? About forever.
I'm Vance Miller, and I represent the John F. Nagel Foundation. We're proud to support American history and keep this alive. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Mikey Bargwin from Idaho Power Company. How's that? Good morning. I'm Mikey Bargwin from Idaho Power Company, and it's an absolute privilege for our company to be a small part of the support for this Warhawk Air Museum. And as many organizations, we've had many veterans that have been a part of our country and our freedoms. We thank you for this opportunity.
I'm Doug Carnahan, and this is Meredith Carnahan. We're very pleased to play a role in this important event of remembrance.
I'm Judy Trout from Morse Starrett Products Company. It has really been a privilege to be connected with the Warhawk Air Museum and help with this honor. And I appreciate all the veterans, but most especially on this day, the Vietnam veterans. Thank you, thank you.
Hi, I'm Cassie Lindsay. I'm with the Lindsay Family Foundation, and I'm honored to be here. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Jay Tyler from AgriBeef and the Double R Ranch brand. Thank you for your service. We're very grateful to be part of this in our own small way. Thank you.
I'm Bob Piazza with Price Pump Company. Thank you, Sue and John, for allowing us the opportunity to be here today. This sort of event is a rarity in California, so we had to come to Idaho to celebrate it. Thank you.
That's great. I'm Doug Armstrong, president of Idaho's News Channel 7. Our role in this was awareness, getting the word out, and telling this great story. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. We would not be standing here if it weren't for you, so thank you. I'm going to turn this now over to a man that most of us know and love and admire and really enjoy, and he is so nervous, so be nice, please. Major General Gary Saylor. He's the commanding general for the Idaho National Guard here in Boise. His responsibilities include training the training and combat readiness for all units assigned to the Idaho National Guard. He graduated from North Dakota State University in 1971, began his military career in 71 as a lieutenant in the U.S. Air Force. He commissioned through the Reserve Officer Training Corps. He joined the Idaho Air National Guard in 1977 as a weapons system officer for the 124th Tactical Reconnaissance Group. He has since served as Standardization and Evaluation Officer, Flight Commander, Operations Officer, Deputy Commander for Resources, Chief of Safety, Commander of the 124th Operations Group, and is Vice Commander of the 124th Fighter Group. He served as both 124th Wing Commander and Deputy. He also flew fighters in Vietnam. So without any further ado, as the old saying goes, where are you, Gary? He left. Yeah. Now be nice to him.
Please take your seats. Thanks, everybody. Take your seats. I'd like to use that line out of Robin Williams' movie that I saw a long time ago. Good morning, Vietnam. We're not there, but everybody's here because of that event and that conflict. My presentation this morning, after that introduction by Sue, she only gave me X number of minutes, and she used about half of them, which I'm thankful for. So won't have to be up here that long. But my presentation is going to be a little bit different than the ones that you've heard up to this point in time, because there's a generator running next door for one thing. But no, actually mine is not going to be so much about personal stories. I have a few, but we'll set them aside because over the years they've gotten bigger and grander all the time. I don't want to bore you with that. But what I want to do is talk about the events leading up to the end of the war, and then really some of the significant changes in the Department of Defense and in the military since the war ended. So with that, let me just start here. First of all, thanks for attending. I think John and Sue Paul, I know, have just done awesome work. I can't thank them enough, and I think everybody here over the course of the last number of presentations, whether you were here from the very first one when we talked about how the country got involved with the war, or the helicopter war, the ground war, the air war, the POW experiences and bringing that group of Americans home. It's been educational for me, and I was lived through part of that, and certainly was a young adult when all that was going on. So, but I've learned stuff, and I'm sure all of you have learned something or relearned something that occurred at the time. So my hat's off to her personally, and John for opening this great facility and putting this program together. So with that, if I can figure out how to talk and do the clicker at the same time, which sometimes is a challenge, let me just start, and I'm going to review some of the chronological events. No hissing and boos allowed. Actually, you can. Doesn't matter to me. But these are the events I think all of us kind of set the time frame of what was going on in the war and how we ended that conflict. So on the 20th of January, 1969, President Nixon was inaugurated. He was the 5th president to deal with the Vietnam conflict. He had successfully campaigned, as some of you remember, on a pledge of peace with honor. Just 2 days after he took office, Operation Dewey Canyon started. That was the last major operation by the United States Marines. On the 25th of January of 1969, the Paris peace talks opened with South Vietnam, North Vietnam, the Viet Cong, and the United States all participating. March of 1969, President Nixon authorized Operation Menu, a secret operation. It was the secret bombing of targets in Cambodia, in and along the Cambodian-Vietnam border, where the Vietnamese were driving across the border and storing equipment, people, supplies, and things like that, and then taking them back onto the Ho Chi Minh Trail. 30th of April, 1969, troop levels in Vietnam peaked. 543,000 soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. At the same time, that same month, the death total in Vietnam reached 33,641 combat losses, which was more than we suffered during the Korean War. During the period of 10 to 20 May 1969, 40 U.S. soldiers of the 101st Airborne died during a fierce battle for what was known as Hamburger Hill. During this 10-day period of very intense conflict, the soldiers of the 101st were able to take that hill at the cost of 40 soldiers. Shortly after taking that hill, they were ordered to retreat from that hill, and the enemy took it unopposed. This was the last major search and destroy mission conducted by U.S. troops in Vietnam. Shortly after that, in July of '69, the first troop withdrawals in Vietnam began, with 800 soldiers being returned to the United States. Shortly after that, in August of '69, Secretary of State Kissinger conducted the first secret meetings in Paris with representatives from Hanoi. December of '69, the fighting strength now was reduced by 115,000 men. We had incurred 40,024 casualties by the end of '69. December of '70, as you can see, the troop levels continued to drop. We were now down from a high of 543,000 to 280,000. During the same period of time, DoD estimated that 60,000 soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines stationed in Vietnam or having traveled through Vietnam had experimented with drugs. There were over 200 incidences of fragging, and the units were plagued with racial unrest. April of '71, the last Marine combat units departed Vietnam. By December of '71, the troop strength had now dropped to 156,800. By April of '72, troop levels had now dropped to 68,000, 69,000, the slide says. I can't read. In May of '72, in response to the Easter offensive, Operation Linebacker began. During Operation Linebacker, we mined harbors and intensified bombing of roads, bridges, and oil facilities. August of '72, the last U.S. combat troops departed Vietnam. Operation Linebacker ended. Over 40,000 sorties and 125,000 tons of bombs have been dropped during the Easter offensive. This time, this was the heaviest fighting of the war. The Easter offensive, just to back up for a second, was an attempt by the North Vietnamese to take over South Vietnam. They saw the withdrawal of U.S. troops, they saw the waning interest by the United States public, and they saw the ineffectiveness of the South Vietnamese army, and saw this as an opportunity to launch a major offensive in the South to take over that country. Linebacker 1 was specifically initiated to stop that offensive, and they did stop that offensive. November of '72, troop withdrawals from Vietnam was complete. During this time, President Nixon had warned Hanoi that he would take swift and retaliatory action if the proposed peace plan was violated. December of '72, because peace talks were stalled, Operation Linebacker 2 began. It was an attempt to bomb the North Vietnamese into submission and into the bargaining table, which was successful. Called the Christmas bombing, this 10-day period of intense bombing of specifically targets in the Hanoi and Haiphong area. Aircraft dropped over 100,000 tons of bombs on those two cities and those two areas in that 10-day period. 27 January 1973, the Paris Peace Accords were signed. In this agreement, the United States agreed to halt all military activity and withdraw all personnel from Southeast Asia, or from Vietnam. The North Vietnamese agreed to release American-held POWs and were allowed to remain in South Vietnam, which was very upsetting to the South Vietnamese people and their government. South Vietnam was now considered one country with two separate governments. January of '73, the last American soldiers to die in combat was killed. February of '73, Operation Homecoming began, which was the release of the 591 held prisoners of war. May of '73, the last remaining troops were withdrawn from Vietnam, as President Nixon declares, quote, "The day we have all worked and prayed for has finally come," unquote. August of '73, U.S. bombing operations in Cambodia were halted. December of '74, North Vietnam violated the Paris Peace Treaty and invaded South Vietnam. In April of '75, 29 April, the North Vietnamese Army began shelling Tan Son Nhut Air Base near Saigon. Conditions deteriorated. President Ford ordered Operation Frequent Wind, which was the helicopter evacuation of some 7,000 American and South Vietnamese forces from Saigon. On 30th April 1975 at 8:35 a.m., the last Americans, who were 10 Marines from the U.S. Embassy in Saigon, departed Saigon. For more than 3 million men and women who served in the Vietnam War, we were the first group of veterans who had fought gallantly, won every battle on land, sea, and air, yet many in America believe we'd lost the war. The stigma haunted thousands who served diligently and gallantly. I think this quote on this slide fittingly sums up how many who served in Vietnam felt. So that's how the war ended. Let's talk about what's changed since the war. In the early 70s, if you'd read books about the United States Army, you've seen titles like The Army in Anguish, America's Army in Crisis, Crisis in Command, Defeated, The Death of the Army. Obviously, a common theme throughout these books was the ineffectiveness, the poor leadership, and the poor performance of the Army. Conversely, if you'd gone to the newsstand or to a BX or PX and picked up a book in the 90s about the Army, you'd have seen titles like Getting It Right, Prodigal Soldiers, How the Generation of Officers Born of Vietnam Revolutionized the American Style of War. Books today focus on the Army as a formidable professional organization, not one that's poorly equipped, poorly trained, and poorly led. How did this transformation occur? Most of us remember General Westmoreland, who is a very instrumental figure in Vietnam, first as the commander of forces in Vietnam, and then later as the Secretary of Defense during the last few years of Vietnam. General Westmoreland actually, for some of the bad press he may or may not have gotten at the time, had a very good understanding of what was wrong with the Army. He recognized the Army faced problems like declining budgets, low popular support, substance abuse, poor equipment modernization, and he initiated a number of reforms to transform the Army into what he wanted it to be, which was a professional, well-led organization. Among the more significant changes he initiated were decentralized training, which has benefited the Army since that day, improving training techniques, establishing the officer performance management system, centralized enlistment, assignment, and promotion process, and improving the officer education system. One of General Westmoreland's additional contributions was to recognize the importance of the helicopter in modern warfare. I think the introduction of helicopters to Vietnam has been well chronicled in both books and movies, but up until that time, helicopter had not been part of the Army's fighting force. It became such a huge part of the Vietnam experience and is integral to the Army combat fight today. Probably the most significant impact he had was the professionalism and the establishment of the non-commissioned officer education system. The backbone of the Army is the non-commissioned officer, those senior NCOs who lead the troops. Through General Westmoreland's vision, we have established education, leadership training for that NCO cadre, and they remain the prominent backbone of the Army and one of the primary reasons of the high professionalism and effectiveness of the Army today. General Westmoreland was followed in office by General Abrams, who also was the commanding general at the time of the end of the Vietnam War. General Abrams followed General Westmoreland and shared General Westmoreland's vision for training, and he specifically formed Training and Doctrine Command, which was a new concept at that time, but that actually gave a single 4-star general the responsibility of training, teaching, and developing the Army in terms of its equipment, its doctrine, and its force structure. Secondly, he focused on the Big Five. As you remember me saying, General Westmoreland was concerned about the modernization and equipping of the Army, and so this Big Five was the M1 main battle tank, the Bradley fighting vehicle, the Apache attack helicopter, the Black Hawk, and the Patriot missile system. All systems that are still in use and are the primary combat vehicles of the Army today. Abrams also, most of his changes are categorized as an effort to achieve stability in the Army, in its resources, and to improve the effectiveness of the Army. One of General Abrams' big contributions was the development of combat training centers where units could truly test their skills in realistic scenarios against skilled opposing forces. One such training center is the National Training Center located at Fort Irwin in Southern California, which has been described as tougher than anything the troops faced in Iraq. The training scenario continues to this day. The 116th Combat Brigade from Idaho is just returning from a 3-week rotation at the National Training Center. I was down there, and trust me, it is harder than anything they faced on either of their deployments to Iraq. All of this is the development of General Abrams and his realistic training scenarios. The Army wasn't the only ones who realized that they had training issues in Vietnam. The Air Force realized that its air-to-air combat success was much lower than in any conflict that they had previously been involved in. The Air Force had come to rely on long-range missiles and a lack of air combat maneuver training. So to correct these two deficiencies, two new training programs were initiated. First, an aggressor squadron was started. The mission of this squadron was to fly aircraft similar in size and performance to our primary adversary, which was the Soviet Union at that time, and to employ the tactics used by that adversary. This was to combat, this squadron was to cure the training deficiency in air combat maneuvering that crews had experienced in Vietnam. The Air Force also had determined that aircrew chances of survival in combat dramatically increased after they had completed their first 10 combat missions. So they created a large force training exercise called Red Flag, and it specifically was created to provide an opportunity for crews to perform 10 very realistic, very demanding simulated combat missions in a safe training environment. The Navy followed suit soon after that and also created a large force training exercise called Strike University. Both of these programs are still in existence today. In fact, the squadrons from Mountain Home Air Force Base just returned from Red Flag about 2 weeks ago. As some will remember, at the time of Vietnam, we were the big gorilla in the world as far as the armed forces is concerned. Since then, we have significantly been reduced in size and makeup of the force. In 1970, there were over 3 million men and women serving in uniform. Today, that number has shrunk to 1.3 million, a 43% decrease. Specifically, the Army has shrunk by 37%, the Air Force by 39%, the Navy by 46%, and the Marine Corps by 30%. Other more noticeable changes since Vietnam obviously include equipment and uniforms. Digital innovation, smart weapons, UAVs, enhanced communications have all made our weapon systems more lethal and more accurate. What we experimented with and just barely saw a glimpse of in the first Gulf War is now commonplace and even out of date compared to the modern weapons we have. We fly combat missions from workstations here in the United States halfway across the world, deliver combat ordnance. As the slide shows, we've also gone through a lot of uniform changes. Generals love to change uniforms, I think. I don't know if they have stock in clothing manufacturers or what, but we sure have gone through a lot. From the green fatigues of Vietnam that many of you remember, we've moved through the woodland BDUs that were pretty common through the 80s and the 90s, into the desert BDUs of the first Gulf War, into the current ACU ABUs that the Army and the Air and the Navy and the Marines wear. And now we have a new uniform that's just being put into service called the OCP, the Operational Combat Pattern. The difference of this uniform from the previous is this is a single uniform, multi-service uniform, so everybody will be wearing the same combat uniform. The makeup of the service has also been another area of very significant change. Prior to and during Vietnam, women typically served only in female specialties, and their numbers were only a small percentage of the total force. Clerks, typists, telephone operators, administrative specialists, and of course, the medical field were predominantly where our women in the military served. The percentage of women serving has dramatically changed since the 70s. In 1973, only 1.6% of the force was female, compared to 15% of the force today. An estimated 7,500 women served in Vietnam, while more than 41,000 served in Desert Storm. Today, over 200,000 women are serving, with about 18% being officers, which is about the exact same percentage as the males. Well, the numbers have increased, so have the roles. In 2013, the Secretary of Defense reversed previous DoD policy. He eliminated all prohibitions on women being assigned to combat units. Some previously restricted positions were immediately open to females, and others are still being phased in. I'm sure many of you heard or are aware that just earlier this month, the first 2 women completed the Army Ranger School. Let's talk about policy changes for a bit. The most significant policy change, in my opinion, as a result of the Vietnam War was the all-volunteer force. With the exception of Vietnam, the reserve component had a major role in every war or conflict in modern American history. In World War I, 17 of the 43 divisions, or almost 40% of the divisions serving, were reserve units. In World War II, the entire nation mobilized and fought. 44 National Guard and Reserve divisions fought gallantly in both the European and the Pacific theaters and fought in every major campaign. During the Korean War, over 338,000 guardsmen and reservists served. Vietnam was the first time in modern history that the Guard and the Reserve were not a major factor in the total effort to fight a war. Less than 1% of those who served in Vietnam over a 10-year period were reservists. This lack of the use of the reserve component during the Vietnam War was considered by many senior officers to be the most fateful decision made by then President Johnson. Secretary of Defense Melvin Laird, with the experiences of previous wars, announced a total force policy in 1970. This policy was intended to deal with the end of conscription, or the draft, and clearly define the respective roles of the active and the reserve components. Due to General Abrams' extensive work in crafting this concept, it became known as the Abrams Doctrine and was specifically intended to address overutilization of the active force, public support of military endeavors, and the lack of reliability of the reserve component. General Abrams' views were evident in his quote regarding the total force, and I quote as on the slide, "They're not taking us to war again without calling up the reserves," unquote. The consensus was when the reserve component goes to war, it also mobilizes the American public and the national will. Today, 53% of the Army's combat forces, 38% of the combat support, and 34% of the combat service support reside in this reserve component. On the Air Force side, 27% of the total aircraft inventory resides in the reserve component, including 51% of the air refueling capability, 46% of the transport capability, and 35% of its fighters. The change from conscription to an all-volunteer force was a contentious issue when it was initially proposed. However, concerns about relying on volunteerism to maintain a professional military or required levels have proven to be unfounded. Many did not believe the all-volunteer force could be sustained and that over an extended period, the reserve component would falter. Experiences in Iraq and Afghanistan over the past 15 years have clearly demonstrated the all-volunteer force can be sustained both during peace and war. During 2015, more than 50% of the combat brigades in Iraq were National Guard brigades. The all-volunteer concept has produced the finest fighting force the United States has ever had, and one that is broadly representative of the American population. Last month we heard from a number of individuals about POW and MIAs, and I don't have anything to add for that, but I do want to talk about the flag and the National League of Families just for a second. On the 10th of August 1990, Congress passed Public Law 101-355, which recognized the POW-MIA flag and designated it, quote, as a symbol of our nation's concern and commitment to resolving as fully as possible the fates of Americans still prisoner, missing, and unaccounted for in Southeast Asia, thus ending the uncertainty for their families and the nation. Other than Old Glory, the POW-MIA flag is the only flag ever to fly over the White House. Today, the POW-MIA flag remains a visible reminder of the plight of America's POWs and MIAs from all wars. Yellow is the official color of the armor branch and has been used throughout history. The yellow ribbon symbol became widely known during the 70s, was the theme of a popular song, Tie a Yellow Ribbon Around the Old Oak Tree. And no, don't worry, I'm not going to try and sing it. It was a sign for our men and women coming home from Vietnam. They were welcome home. An important signal. The song, sung by Tony Orlando, sold over 3 million records in a 3-week period. I'm going to digress just for a second because I want to tell you this story that I had an opportunity to attend an event about a year ago with Tony Orlando. And he tells a story that when he put this song out, he was an unknown entertainer in New York, and the song was like number 35 on the top 25. Wasn't even making the top 25. He got a call from an individual called Bob Hope. And Tony would tell the story, answers the phone and says, "This Bob Hope." And he said, "Sure, you know, and I'm the president." "Who is this really?" "No, it's Bob Hope." "And I'm the vice president." "No, who really is this?" "I'm the president." Or "I'm Bob Hope." "Well, what do you want?" "I want you to come to Dallas. We're going to have a big welcome home for all the POWs, and I want you to sing your song, Tie a Yellow Ribbon." And he says, "It's not even in the top 20. He says, "It will be before you get there." And so I don't know how it happened, but 3 million copies in 3 weeks. And when he got there, that song was #1. And Tony Orlando has performed at every reunion of the POWs since that first one. That yellow ribbon really put it back in the the yellow ribbon back into focus. And I think you've seen since Desert Storm, Iraqi Freedom, Enduring Freedom, all the operations we've been in. You see yellow ribbons on cars, on doors, every place. See them on the Capitol as a reminder that we still have people in harm's way. I would like to have not talked about this, but you can't talk about Vietnam without discussing post-traumatic stress disorder. We've called it shell shock, we've called it battle fatigue, we've called it war neurosis, but it's a serious condition that develops after a person experienced or witnessed a traumatic or terrifying event in which serious physical harm occurred or was threatened. PTSD is a lasting consequence of traumatic ordeals that cause intense fear, helplessness, or horror, such as experienced during war. Regardless of which war is considered, a high rate of PTSD among veterans is found. Researchers indicated that 30% of the Vietnam veterans suffered from PTSD at some point, compared to 10% of those serving in Operation Desert Storm and 11 to 20% of those serving in Operation Iraqi Freedom or Operation Enduring Freedom. Today, 50 years after Vietnam, nearly 11% of Vietnam veterans still suffer from what's termed chronic post-traumatic stress, which usually has a very negative effect on an individual's life. Why were the rates higher among Vietnam veterans compared to veterans from other wars or other campaigns? One needs to consider how Vietnam veterans were treated in comparison to veterans from other wars. Saluted as conquering heroes, World War II veterans returned to ticker tape parades. America was in love with its veterans. Conversely, Vietnam veterans returned home to angry crowds, were accused of horrific autocracies, and told not to wear their uniforms in public. America was angry about the war and took out their frustrations on the veterans as they returned. The impacts of the trauma experienced in combat combined with treatment received at home was more than many could successfully cope with. Dropping out of society, abusing drugs and alcohol, Vietnam veterans continued to suffer from a lack of an accepting population and available medical help. Dismissed as potheads, thousands of veterans suffering from PTSD continued to suffer for many years. The good news is much has changed. Wars will always expose veterans to the circumstances that cause PTSD. Help has generally arrived. America, as we saw earlier on the yellow ribbon slide, once again welcomes its heroes home. Commonplace today are salutes at airports for returning veterans, and has been that way since Desert Storm. Seeing individuals, soldiers, sailors, airmen, marine on flights being upgraded to first class because somebody gives them a seat is a testament to how America has changed their views of the veteran. Professional help is available. Family programs are in place, and open dialogue occurs at all formations and in all branches of the service, not only to help prepare members who are about to enter combat, but during combat and when they come home, extensive series of tests, surveys, questions, and much is talked about in our formations units today about PTSD. Our veterans are encouraged to get help. We want them to get help. We know that just like a car, it's got a lot of miles. Sometimes it needs a tune-up. Sometimes the veteran needs just a little bit of help to get through that crisis. All of this is done with no stigma attached. We have many individuals in our formations who have suffered from PTSD due to one of the recent operations and have gotten help and perform admirably still in our formations. Of all the changes I've seen in my career, all these things I've talked about, I've seen these things happen. To me, this is the most visible and the most rewarding change that's happened, is the way America treats her veterans today. Of course, we can't really talk about the end of Vietnam without talking about the memorial. The Vietnam Memorial actually consists of the memorial wall containing the name of 58,300 service members. Those names include 40 sets of brothers, 3 father-son combinations, and 8 women who died while serving in Vietnam or remain missing in action. A short distance away is the 3 soldiers, sometimes called, or the 3 servicemen, sometimes we refer to it as the 3 soldiers. And near that is the Vietnam Women's Memorial. The wall was officially dedicated on 13 November 1982 and is visited annually by more than 3,000 visitors to Washington, D.C. So we've gone from the mid-60s to the end of the war to things that have changed. I could talk for hours and hours about all the little things that have changed. These are some of the highlights I thought I'd bring to your attention. Once again, I want to thank all of you for your service. This nation is a great nation because of your service. And thank you for being here today, and it's my great privilege and honor to speak to a group of veterans like you. Thank you.
What a great man. He didn't sound very shy. So I want to tell you before I introduce our last speaker that a bunch of us last night decided we were going to tie a whole bunch of yellow ribbons around all the chairs we could, and you know, really get with the yellow ribbon because it means so much to all of us. And when we were all done, the lights were on, we stood back and we went, someone's going to walk in here and go, what's with the green ribbons? Swear to God, they looked yellow to me when I bought them. So they're supposed to be yellow in honor of you and your homecoming. Welcome home. So our last speaker is Franz. And Franz Vandenbroek, he was here once before for the helicopter series, and he was so incredibly powerful in what he had to say about that represented everybody that we asked him to come back, and he was gracious enough to come back and just give us a short presentation once more because it's very inspiring. We thought it's a great way to end our series. So Franz, U.S. Army, Vietnam, Huey crewman. Come on up. I'm not going to say anything more. I'm going to let you tell them.
Well, thank you, Sue, for that very kind introduction, and thank you folks for being here today and sharing this very special event with us in this incredible setting. The Warhawk Museum certainly knows how to treat Vietnam veterans, don't they? And for that, we should all be grateful. I see some familiar faces amongst you, and that's because 2 months ago I spoke here about the helicopter war. And apparently my presentation was well received because the museum asked if I would come back and give it again today at this event. Ordinarily, it's not a good idea for a speaker to speak on the same topic to the same audience at the same venue just 2 months apart. But in this case, I thought I'd make an exception because in my view, Vietnam veterans are, by definition, exceptional people. People who understand the definition of free lunch. So those of you who heard me speak last June, if this time you doze off, you get a little sleepy, it's all right. I understand. And for the rest of you, hello, I'm Franz Vandenbroek, and I wasn't born in Idaho. I grew up in Indonesia. This picture was taken in 1954. I'm the little guy out front. And my ancestry is, well, there's some Dutch and there's some Indonesian, and we think there might be a little bit of Chinese involved on my mother's side. Not totally clear on that last part, but all of that simply means that my siblings and I are easily confused. But one thing we were crystal clear on. In 1958, when I was 10 years old, things turned violent and ugly in Indonesia. And anyone with even a thimble's worth of Dutch blood in their veins had to flee the country. Our lives were at risk. And my family eventually found refuge in America. Whoops. In 1960, when I was 12 years old, the lady on the left, the gray-haired lady, was our sponsor, a retired school teacher. And we were grateful to America for adopting us. And we believed that we owed our new country a debt, a family debt. We just weren't quite sure how to pay it. And then the war in Vietnam broke out, and our military needed young men. Mom and Dad knew all about war. In World War II, Dad was a POW of the Japanese for 3 years. Nevertheless, in our family, serving in the military was considered honorable, and perhaps an appropriate means for paying down the family debt. So in 1966, when I turned 18, I registered for the draft, which was a requirement at the time, and I simultaneously asked the draft board to move my name to the top of the list. Not long thereafter, a very personalized letter arrived. A friendly letter. It began with greetings, followed by, you are hereby instructed to report for induction into the Armed Forces of the United States. By November 1966, I was in basic training at Fort Ord in California. And in basic, I learned a new word, infantry. That's the foot soldier, the guy who slogs through the rice paddies and has to deal with snipers and snakes and booby traps. And it was pretty clear that my class in basic training was being groomed as replacements for the casualties we were taking in Vietnam. And initially, I guess I was kind of okay with being in the infantry, except for one thing that really, really troubled me. Assuming I'd survive, at the end of my 2-year stint, I wouldn't have gained any useful, marketable skills, except how to sleep outside in the rain and sneak up on little Asian men. Not much call for that in industry. But the Army had a solution, as the Army always does. They offered a technical training school in helicopter repair. Helicopters, the wave of the future. In a few years, every civilian would likely have one. I could have a job for life. And it sounded safe. And the only thing I had to do to get to school was agree to a 3rd year of service. And that seemed fair. So after basic, I headed off to Fort Eustis, Virginia, where I spent many hours in the classroom learning how to repair helicopters. The beginning of my safe Army career. But then one day, a deuce and a half drove up. And then one day, a great big honkin' truck drove up. And the entire class climbed in, and the truck took us to the shooting range. And at the range, there was a tripod with an M60 machine gun mounted on top. And there was a grumpy-looking sergeant standing next to it, clearly a Vietnam veteran. And he declared that on this day, we were to learn how to fire this weapon. And one of the students in the class meekly raised his hand and said, "Excuse me, we're mechanics. Why do we have to shoot this gun?" And the sergeant nailed the student with that condescending, withering look. You guys know the look, right? The look that says, "You dumbass." And then he added, "You must learn to fire this weapon because your United States Army in Vietnam uses mechanics as door gunners in our new fleet of Bell UH-1 helicopters." And all of a sudden, my job didn't sound that safe anymore. So shortly after graduation from Fort Eustis, I was sent home on a short leave, just long enough to say goodbye to my family, including my brother, Herb, who also incidentally tried to join the Army, but the poor guy couldn't pass the physical. He had a defect in his ankles. Not long after this picture was taken, I reported to the docks in Oakland, California, to prepare for shipping to Vietnam. Shipping, literally. This is the USN General William Weigel, a worn-out, clapped-out, beat-up, leftover World War II troop carrier, a boat. Now, I realize you Navy guys would call this a ship, but we're Army. This was an effing boat. Halfway to Vietnam, a boiler exploded. We crept along at 9 knots and had to divert to Subic Bay in the Philippines for repairs. This is the enlisted man's club in Subic Bay, where a couple of underage buddies and I might have gotten into an altercation with some sailors that ended with us taking ownership of their hats. Incidentally, the young man in the middle, Scotty Henderson, served his year in Vietnam and then disappeared for nearly 50 years. But he flew in from Atlanta on Thursday to attend this event. He's seated in the second row. Don't do that. The man is trouble. Watching you. Eventually, the William Weigel did reach Vietnam and dropped us off in Vung Tau, then turned around and sailed off to Bremerton, Washington, where she was promptly scrapped. Truly, Google it. Yeah. In Vietnam, I was assigned to the 118th Assault Helicopter Company, northeast of Saigon. I fixed helicopters. Someone else flew them. That changed in April of 1968 when I was transferred to the unit next door, the 68th Assault Helicopter Company. The top tigers needed crew chiefs. A crew chief is a custodian, a caretaker of a single specific helicopter. This was one of mine. Crew chiefs are up at 5 a.m. every morning and fuss over their aircraft to get it ready for that day's mission. And crew chiefs stay with their helicopters late into the night and fuss over them some more to get them ready for the next day's mission. And in between, crew chiefs fly with their helicopters wherever they went and doubled as door gunners. Just like the sergeant at Fort Eustis had predicted. I began flying combat missions in Vietnam in April of 1968. By mid-May, I had lost 3 helicopters and 2 pilots to enemy action and a crash. By June, I was transferred to the gunship platoon. Gunships are heavily armed attack helicopters that only fly and fight. And for the next 6 months, I flew nearly every day. Until November 1968, when my year in Vietnam was over. But then instead of rotating home, I concluded my place was with my buddies in Vietnam, and I extended my tour 6 months and made 3. Whoops. Buddies. In March 1969, while attacking an enemy position, my gunship plowed into the ground, rolled over, and disintegrated. And I was medevaced out of Vietnam, a 20-year-old casualty of the war. And although I can't say that I was comfortable, I was pretty happy that the family debt had at least partially been paid. I was discharged in July 1969. Shortly thereafter, drove to courthouse in Los Angeles, took an exam, raised my right hand, and proudly became an American citizen. Thank you, sir. Yeah, you must be a citizen too then, right? Yeah. I'd left Vietnam in a hurry. Never had a chance to say goodbye to my buddies, and we lost track of each other for 35 years. But then in 2004, on the internet, I came across the name of a Vietnam veteran that sounded familiar. Ron Sheffield, who lives in Salinas, California. My gunship platoon leader in Vietnam was a career military officer, a pilot named Captain Sheffield. His was a very prestigious and responsible position, and he filled it superbly. Captain Sheffield was fearless. I had a photograph of Captain Sheffield standing next to my helicopter with a huge smile on his face. That smile was his trademark. And so I called Ron Sheffield in Salinas, and sure enough, it was him. He'd gone on to serve 3 tours in Vietnam, retired as lieutenant colonel, then went to work for Lockheed training space shuttle astronauts for the Hubble telescope repair missions. He also told me he'd be visiting his son, who lived near my home, in a few weeks' time, and asked if I would join him for dinner. So on that day, my wife and I drove to the son's house, and as I knocked on the door, I was nervous and apprehensive. there's this hierarchy in the Army. There are officers, there are enlisted men. And the Army forbids fraternization between the two. Pilots were officers, gunners and crew chiefs enlisted. But although the pilots were in charge of the mission, when the enemy opened fire, pilots could not readily defend themselves. They were busy piloting. And truth be told, the bad guys would usually try to shoot the pilots first. That yellow circle defines a hole through the windshield where a round came through. Fortunately, it only grazed the pilot's head. So, for protection, pilots depended on the gunner and the crew chief in the back seat. Our job was to see the enemy first and to pull the trigger first. And although that interdependence between pilots and crew was well understood by everyone, I don't ever recall at the end of a mission a pilot saying to me, "Crew chief, thank you for preparing an outstanding helicopter today and for keeping me alive." And I don't ever recall at the end of a mission saying to a pilot, "Sir, thank you for flying my helicopter so skillfully today and for keeping me alive." In my personal experience, those words were simply never spoken. So as I rang the doorbell at Captain Sheffield's son's house, I didn't know what to expect. But then the door flung open, and out rushed an older man that I might not have recognized but for the smile on his face. And I held out my hand and said, "Captain Sheffield, I presume." And he said, "No, it's Ron." And then he hugged me. We spent a wonderful evening having dinner and telling lies about how fearless we used to be. Ron Sheffield and his wife. Some of you may remember Ron Sheffield. He came to speak at the helicopter event 2 months ago. But back in 2004, Ron and I agreed we would meet in Nashville, Tennessee 3 months later. Our Vietnam unit was having a reunion there for the first time. So on that day, my wife and I flew to Nashville, and as I marched into the lobby of the hotel where the reunion was to be held, I was greeted by older men that I once addressed as Sir and Captain and Lieutenant, but who now simply introduced themselves as Stan and George and Dave. We spent a wonderful 3 days expressing appreciation for each other and telling lies about how fearless we used to be. Lots of lies. I learned 3 important things in Nashville that weekend. 1, officer pilots actually have first names. Who knew? But more importantly, I learned that there is no greater bond between men than there is between men who have been in combat together. And that bond transcends rank, age, race, religion, background, social status, and even 35 years of separation. The third thing I learned was kind of sad. The 68th Assault Helicopter Company lost 32 men in Vietnam. And of those who survived, we'd lost many more since to illness, Agent Orange, cancer, heart attacks, strokes, accidents, and suicide. And of those still alive, about 1 in 4, mostly enlisted men, gunners and crew chiefs, suffered from debilitating post-traumatic stress disorder. Some had completely withdrawn from society. This handsome all-American young boy is Jim, the son of a minister. Jim was the first gunship gunner I had when I began flying gunships, and he was very good at his job. Jim had accrued more confirmed kills than almost anyone in the platoon. He was my mentor. He showed me what my job was when we were up in the air. This picture was taken when Jim first came to Vietnam. And this is Jim at the end of his tour, peeking out from behind a buddy, skittish, withdrawn, paranoid, and addicted to pills. Today, Jim lives alone in a shack in a forest in Virginia, isolated and alone, with his only companion, a small dog that he calls Little Bit. I've asked Jim repeatedly to come to the reunions with me. I've even offered to pay his way. But Jim won't come because he's fearful that reuniting with his buddies will propel him right back to where he was 45 years ago. The suffering of men like Jim and the loss of our 32 KIAs got me to thinking, was there a point to their service in Vietnam? What was the legacy they left behind? What will our legacy be after we're gone? Those questions are difficult to answer because for many years, we Vietnam veterans were pariahs in the community. Other veterans that came before us and after us were treated with dignity and respect, but not us. We were the black sheep from the wrong side of town, despised and rejected and called vicious names. Misfits, drug addicts, baby killers. And so, many of us quickly learned to keep our service a secret. Didn't talk about it much, played it close to the vest. And in the process, some of us, like Jim, did irreparable damage to our psyches. And those who did eventually muster the courage to reveal our secret identities then had to deal with insensitive pseudo-intellectuals who delighted in ambushing us by asking awkward questions, such as, how do you Vietnam veterans feel about losing the war? Do you think the war was worth it? Why did so many Americans have to die when in the end it made no difference? Well, how do we feel about losing the war? We don't, because we didn't. American soldiers won every significant battle in Vietnam. American soldiers won every significant battle in Vietnam and eventually depleted the enemy to the degree where they had little choice but to sign a peace treaty in Paris, 1973. Only after we left did the North reinvade the South. There's a contemporary lesson in there someplace, isn't there? Do we think the war was worth it? Sadly, the answer depends on your perspective. If you lost a son, a brother, a husband, a father in Vietnam, you might answer that question one way. But if you're one of the hundreds of thousands of South Vietnamese boat people who fought alongside of us in Vietnam and who left everything behind to find freedom in America, as my family did in 1960, your answer might be different. Today, some of their children serve in our military. In 1975, 9-year-old Viet Lung came to the United States, a 9-year-old son of a penniless boat person. Today, Brigadier General Viet Lung is the Deputy Commanding General of the 1st Air Cavalry, ironically, fighting for our freedoms the way the CAF once fought for his. As for me personally, not a day goes by that I don't reflect on the most significant historical event of my generation, especially after Apache helicopter pilots returning from Iraq told me that the helicopter tactics we developed in Vietnam are still in use today and have saved numerous American lives time and time again. And then there's the cruelest question of all. Why did so many Americans have to die when in the end it made no difference? Before I address the question, I'd like to introduce you to two of those Americans. Paul Hill, 24, Circleville, Ohio. Charles Clifford Van Allen, 20, Mount Vernon, Washington. Both were helicopter pilots. At a community college near my home, the Ceramic Arts Department erected a Veterans Memorial, and the memorial is surrounded by a series of engraved tiles embedded in the ground. This is one of those tiles. Whoops. And it reads, "In memory of Warrant Officer Paul Hill and Charles Clifford Van Allen, 68th Assault Helicopter Company, killed in action, Vietnam, 1968. From your crew chief, Van." On Memorial Day, you'll have no trouble finding this tile. There will be an American flag and flowers on it. So, why did our buddies have to die when in the end it made no difference? Perhaps the answer can be found by examining the personal motives each of us had when we fought in Vietnam. And I can tell you this: when the bullets began to fly and the explosions were all around us, the last thing on the minds of helicopter crews in Vietnam was the domino theory. Democracy for Vietnam. American prestige. Our total focus was on saving the lives of our infantry brothers on the ground below us. And their focus was on survival and saving the lives of their buddies fighting alongside of them. From my perch in my helicopter, I saw young Americans risk and lose their lives trying to save the lives of their buddies. We fought for each other. So perhaps they died so that we could live, so that we could return to America and then make a difference. This Vietnam veteran stands before you today trying to do exactly that, make a difference. And throughout America, other Vietnam veterans are doing the same with outstanding effect. In the decades since we served, the conscience of the American people finally caught up with and left in the dust the shameful way we were treated when we returned from Vietnam. Today, soldiers returning from Iraq and Afghanistan march proudly and safely through airports, readily identifiable by their spiffy camouflage uniforms, and are greeted with smiles and applause and handshakes and hugs from strangers. Those strangers are the children of the people that never came to the parades you never got. Vietnam eventually taught America that it's okay to hate the war, but never the warrior. So if it was the job, of the Vietnam veteran to pour the foundation for the appropriate, ethical, honorable treatment of men and women who fight for our freedoms today, then perhaps that's the difference that we made. Not a bad legacy, don't you think? And it's the legacy of Paul Hill and Charles Clifford Van Allen and 58,000 others whose names are carved into a wall in Washington, D.C. And it's the legacy of every one of you who served in Vietnam. Gentlemen, and a few ladies, if appropriate, the Warhawk Museum of Nampa today remembers those you left behind and honors you. Welcome home. Thank you. Please sit down. I just got a new assignment just now. The next part of our program will be the Missing Man ceremony. And for that, we have recruited one of our gunship pilots who actually flew that aircraft, 069, in Vietnam. Howard's distinction is that he went off to Vietnam and very quickly became skilled enough to fly gunships. And when he returned home, he was just 20 years old. Howard, and with the help of R.J. Smith, will now proceed with the ceremony.
Welcome. This will be the final ceremony. It's known as the Missing Man Tribute. Normally when we get together and have a reunion, we have all types of activities. I can assure you that out of everything we do during a reunion, the Missing Man ceremony is the most dear and near to our hearts. I will now read the Missing Man. Your attention is directed to the small table located in a place of honor near the head of the hangar. It is our way of symbolizing the fact that some of our brothers are missing from our midst. They are unable to be with us this day, and so we remember them. The table, set for one, is small. It symbolizes the frailty of us all. The tablecloth is white, symbolic of the purity of their intentions to respond to their country's call to arms. The single rose displayed in a vase reminds us of the families and loved ones of our brothers who will not return. The red ribbon tied so prominently on the vase is reminiscent of the red ribbon worn upon the lapel and breast of thousands who bear witness to the tragedy of POWs and MIAs and with unyielding determination demand a proper accounting for our missing. A slice of lemon rests on the plate to remind us of their bitter fate. There is salt upon the plate, symbolic of the tears of the families and loved ones. The glass is inverted. They cannot toast with us tonight. The chair is forever empty. They are not here. Today, we take time to recall those who were our brothers in arms. We depended on them for aid and support. Let us remember all of our missing brothers and honor them as we pause for a moment of silence. I would like to leave y'all with one final thought. Please think for a minute of the fine young men and women who wear the uniform of our military today. They are embracing the same ideals of service to our country that we Vietnam veterans did 50 years ago in Vietnam. May they all return home safely to their families. Thank you.
This is left in a cabinet. The 069 crew sent from all over the country their memorabilia. The guys that flew and fought and were crewing off of the 069. We were fortunate to find that Huey in a junkyard in Sacramento, and we brought it here and eventually had it restored, and all of these guys found us. So they came here and they donated their, so the cabinet in front of the Huey is all from the 069 guys. So our final thing today is going to be an invocation by a very wonderful man, and John Lane is going to introduce him.
Thank you, Sue. Just stay right here, would you please? Where's John? Is he close by? Mr. Paul, would you come forward, please? Okay. I'm about to introduce Kurt Bowers for invocation. Before I do, I'd like to recognize John and Sue. On behalf of the many Vietnam veterans who contributed to this endeavor of the 50th anniversary, those who attended the symposiums and those who will stay in the shadows, I'd like to present to you a token of our appreciation for honoring the Vietnam veteran. The success you achieved by reaching out to us is measured by the overwhelming participation by the community in support of this symposium. This series brought to the forefront the untold stories of these brave Americans and enabled us, the Vietnam vets, to finally feel appreciated and to be welcomed home. Thank you for letting us tell our story. We've got a little plaque here, which is an ammo box cover and a helicopter on it, and John and Sue Paul and the Warhawk Air Museum staff. In gratitude for your celebration and recognition of the Vietnam veterans on the 50th anniversary symposium of the Vietnam War, 1965-2015. Thank you. Hopefully you can put that on the wall with pride. Thank you. Yeah, you bet. I broke it. Taking it out of that, we got to re-glue it. Thank you, guys. Unbelievable what these two have done. When you think about all the way across the country, just how many communities are honoring us. So we're living in a great community, and these two, I mean, this wouldn't be happening without them. She thanks the sponsors, and God bless them. But if these two hadn't got the thing going, no way. So thanks again. Right now, the invocation was given by Chaplain Kurt Bowers, retired as a colonel, 1984, after serving 23 years as a chaplain on active duty. He had a knee replacement, I think, is why he's in this right now. He was awarded many decorations, among them a Silver Star for actions in an engagement with the NVA while serving with the 327th Infantry of the 101st Airborne. He was also awarded a Bronze Star, Meritorious Service Medal, Commendation Medal, Air Medal, and Senior Parachutist Badge. He was introduced into the 327th Infantry 101st Airborne Hall of Fame in 1998. He authored the book Forward Edge of the Battle Area. I partner with Chaplain Bowers in the Bridging the Generations talks to school children here at the museum. And I'm going to attest to you, the kids are glued to what he has to say. It's my pleasure to introduce a true American gentleman and patriot. Help me recognize her, Kurt Bowers.
Thank you. What a distinct honor it is to be part of the closing celebration of these great not invocations, but commemorations. And I ask you to bow your heads with me as we pray together to our living Lord. Sovereign Lord, we thank you for these symposiums commemorating the 50th anniversary of the Vietnam War. Gathered here are vets who know the imperative of making whatever sacrifice necessary so that all people can enjoy the gifts of freedom. We honor them and welcome them home. They've defended our nation's core values of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We acknowledge that freedom is your gift, Lord. We've not created it. We cannot sustain it without you. Our cherished freedoms and priceless liberties were bought at an enormous price by these men and women who put their country before self, and their families also, who have suffered and sacrificed. We recognize that all gave some, and some gave all. There are many here, perhaps still suffering from the scars and wounds of that unpopular war. Some from rejection, not only at airports, but also from the direct results of combat. We here today honor their sacrifices and pray that these symposiums offered may be a catalyst for healing. We know that the war did not require great sacrifice from the masses, but the supreme sacrifice from some of America's best. Our service members went with cries of derisions from those who were practiced in debate and had received too much and given too little. They went when the world feared a greater escalation, and they performed their mission well. duty, honor, and country was the hallmark of their commitment. As one spoke very eloquently from the Hanoi Hilton prison, freedom has a taste to those who have fought and almost die that the protected will never know. Our vets have so much in common as they experience the incessant roar of mortar and artillery fire, high-performance jets, assault helicopters, physical weariness, dehydration, unquenchable thirst, and paralyzing fear. It was a strange world of high adventure and monotony, imminent danger and tedious routine, and gory battles, often culminated in lonely returns to a home country that often didn't experience their service and sacrifice. They experienced great contradictions that led to severe inner conflicts. Our nation owes them a debt that can never be repaid, but must never be forgotten. May we heed the prayer of a former chief of staff who prayed during that Vietnam War. O Lord, lest I go my complacent way, help me remember that out there a soldier died for me today. So long as there be war, I must ask and answer, am I worth dying for? So we thank you today for our military spouses as well, the hidden heroes who kept the home front. They didn't wear uniforms nor take an oath to offer their life's blood to defend our country. They didn't eat sea rats or MREs in a faraway place, but they did covenant to support those who did. May you, O God, make your face shine on these unsung heroes, and also for the families of our Vietnam vets who mourn the loss of loved ones. They're forever remembered and undeniably missed. We pray for special grace from you to go with them as they remember their loved ones as he or she was. So remind us today, Lord, that life is precious, but freedom is priceless. May the sacrifices of our vets not be in vain. Help us do our part to tend and harbor the fragile flame of freedom. And may our nation continue to affirm them and be thankful for their selfless acts of courage and bravery as they served in a very difficult time in our country's history. As a Christian, but with great respect for those of other faiths, I pray in the powerful name of our living Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Well, is anybody hungry? Sounds like a winner. Let me just make a couple of announcements and I'm going to let you go. Senator Risch's representative is here. Is she still here? Where is she? Where? Raise your, come on forward. Come on forward. It was so awesome. He is not in town. Senator Risch is such a supporter of our veterans in this state, and so I was so delighted that she was able to come. So I just want to let her say hello. And then I'll just have one other announcement, and then we're going to go get a hamburger. Come on up.
Good morning. Bring greetings from Senator Risch, and thank you all for your undying service. We know that freedom is not free, and certainly want to continue to build up our military in the United States of America so we can become strong, remain strong, and provide freedoms that we provide every day. So thank you for your service, and thank you for all you have done to make this all happen.
Thank you very much. And it wasn't just me. There were a lot of people involved in this. A lot. Just one other thing, I had a very nice young man hand me this. He was, when he was served in Vietnam, he came across a mom and pop Kincaid. This was a couple who helped our servicemen there. They were able to stay in their home. They were fed them. And he just wanted to know if there were any veterans here that came across mom and pop Kincaid when they were in Saigon. He's stand up so they can see you. He's right here. So if you did or you heard of him, come on up and talk with him, okay? There we go. He'll just be right here. Now, I never told you where the bathrooms were, so I hope you haven't all gone out in the field somewhere or right where you're sitting. So there are 2 here, there are 2 in the main hangar, and there are 2 right outside, okay? So I want you to enjoy the barbecue. AgriBeef has provided hamburgers and hot dogs for us, and Albertsons, and they're out there cooking away, and Albertsons has provided our chips and our drinks and all of those sorts of things, and we are so grateful to them for being so generous. They are so happy to be here. They're very proud to be a part of this, believe me. And then doing most of the cooking is Bob Hayes. If any of you come to our Veterans Breakfast, he is the main man that cooks all of our pancakes and all of our food there too. So be sure to tell them all thank you when you go out. They've got lines, you know, it's all organized, so just go out there and let them boss you around a little. How's that? And enjoy. Thank you so much. What a great conclusion. We hope you'll all come back and see us whenever you can. Thank you so much.
I'm coming home, I've done my time. Now I've